what's happened in the past. In fact, really of all the movements for social justice, I think our movement is one where people today that are involved in it know the least about its history. And I don't really know why that is, and I think it's a shame, and I think we do need to understand something of the history. And of course the Animal Liberation Front is a really important part, played a really important part in the history of the animal protection movement, the animal rights movement. So let me say a bit about that. Let me go back even before the Animal Liberation Front. The Animal Liberation Front began in the early 70s, and before that time, in terms of organisations, groups that protected animals, you had various national organisations campaigning against animal experiments, the fur trade, zoos and circuses, all those kind of things. I don't think anyone in any of those organisations was vegan. In fact, very few of them were even vegetarian. And those groups were mainly all about asking their members to write to their MP, for instance, and send them money. Not send money to the MP, send money to the organisation. The MP's got enough money. So anyway, and very little was being achieved. Very little was being achieved. The one thing that was different to that started in the 1960s was the Hunt Saboteurs Association. People going out, oh, big up to the Hunt Saboteurs! And let me quickly say something in relation to that before I forget. What we've got going on in this country at this very minute, many parts of the country, is horrific badger cull. And the Hunt Saboteurs are very much involved in campaigning against it. So if you're young and fit and you can get out in the field and help them, support them, and try and save some badgers, that's really important. So anyway, we had the Hunt Saboteurs in the 1960s, and a few of us involved in Hunt Sabs and other people that were deeply concerned about the plight of animals. We felt something needs to be done. There wasn't enough being done to protect animals, and the situation for animals was getting worse and worse all the time. So we thought something really radical, something really hard-hitting needed to be done. And a few of us had a meeting, I remember it to this day, we huddled in a corner of a basement cafe in London to talk about what we should do. And we decided to form a direct action organisation to take direct action against all forms of animal abuse. And that group started off being called the Band of Mercy, but it later became the Animal Liberation Front. So the origins of the Animal Liberation Front come from the early 70s. And what happened, we started carrying out direct action. We destroyed a couple of boats used for killing baby seals. We caused a lot of damage to property connected to the vivisection industry, connected to animal experimentation. And also we raided hunt kennels, damaged the vehicles to try and stop them going out hunting, and sometimes we succeeded in doing that. And the ALF actually succeeded in sparing millions of animals from suffering and slaughter. Because the Animal Liberation Front wasn't just about damaging property. I mean, we did a hell of a lot of damage to property connected with animal abuse. But we also directly rescued thousands of animals that were going to be used for experiments, that were going to be used by the fur trade, chickens from battery units, for instance, all sorts of animals were actually directly rescued and taken to sanctuaries, found good homes. So there was all those animals directly rescued. But it was also an even greater, far greater number of animals that were spared from suffering and slaughter through damage that was caused to the property of the animal abuse industries. And there was two major areas where this was really effective. First of all, the fur trade. Now, today there are actually very few outlets for the sale of fur. Harrods, I think, is the only department store that sells fur coats. And you get a few places that will sell fur trim, and there's constant campaigns against them. Places like, companies like Flannels, for instance, a campaign against them because they have products that contain fur. But as far as the big fur coats, that kind of thing, you hardly get that anymore. And the only actual fur shops that you can actually walk into and buy stuff now exist only in London and in a certain part of London. Now, at one time, if you go back to the 1970s, for instance, you would get many department stores had fur departments where they sold fur coats, and every town, and even small towns, would have a fur shop. And even suburbs, I lived in London, and almost every suburb of London had a fur shop at the time. And because of ALF action, because of the direct action taken by the ALF, that over the course of a few years completely changed. ALF action succeeded, or at least played a major part in totally decimating the fur industry. And now, of course, we've got a ban on... We've got a ban on fur farming in the UK, which has existed, I think, since the early 2000s. But sadly, fur products are still allowed to be sold. And of course, what we need is an import ban on that, so that can't happen as well. But in actual fact, that is far, far less now than it was going back, say, 30 years ago, or largely because of ALF actions. And the other area where the ALF had a huge impact was in terms of animal experiments. In the mid-70s, the number of animal experiments in the UK was 6.5 million every year. But after a few years of ALF activity against establishments that carried out animal experiments and against the whole industry that surrounded that, that number went down to about 3 million. So that was 3.5 million fewer animals tortured in laboratories. And really there's no other explanation for that other than ALF actions. There was no laws to stop this. Nothing else going on. And I firmly believe it was very much due to the pressure that the ALF put on the animal experimentation industry, forcing people involved in that to look for other ways of doing experiments that didn't involve animals. So there's two huge areas where there's millions of animals being spared from suffering and slaughter because of the Animal Liberation Front. But that wasn't without a price to be paid by activists. There are actually hundreds of people, hundreds of ALF activists actually went to prison. Every prison in the country, I think, had an Animal Liberation Front activist in at one time. And almost all those people were vegans. These were vegans who were taking this action, by and large. And as well as that, we need to remember a guy called Barry Horn. And Barry Horn Barry Horn didn't just give his freedom for the cause of animal liberation, he gave his life. Because Barry Horn died on hunger strike while in prison for ALF activities. Because he was campaigning for the government to actually live up to a promise they made to hold an inquiry into animal experiments. And the government reneged on its promise that it made at the election, and Barry went on hunger strike, and he sadly died in November 2001. And you know, when I think about all those people that actually gave their freedom, and Barry who gave his life for animal liberation, it does make me rather annoyed and rather upset these days that actually so many vegans aren't even prepared to give out a leaflet. And you know, we really can do better. You know, people have given their freedom, people have died to save animals. You know, come on, you know, you're not going to die. You're not going to die, you're not going to be put in prison. All you've got to do is walk along the road and holding something in your hand, or do a stool, or, you know, these really easy, peaceful things, you know, to campaign for animals. And yet, sadly, you see, in those days, if someone was a vegan, if you went to someone was a vegan and say, you know, like, what do you do apart from sort of being a vegan? They say, oh, I'm an activist, you know, I rescue animals, I campaign. But now, if you say that to the average vegan, that isn't the case. And something, you know, really has gone badly wrong with our movement when that isn't the case anymore. And we need to change that. We really need to change that if we're really going to achieve anything. Because eventually the ALF, it didn't quite die out. I mean, there are still animal liberation front actions today, but they are very few. And I think from the 90s onwards, it's something that's died out. And there are various reasons for this. I think one reason is, you know, there was increased police activity. They put a lot more resources into investigating activists that campaign for animals. And also the prison sentence that people were given became horrendous. Horrendous. I mean, I myself, I spent a total of 9 years altogether in prison for animal liberation front activities. But quite a few people, you know, in the later days of the ALF, in the later days of people campaigning, people using direct action to protect animals, the sentences became, you know, we had people being sentenced to 11 years in prison, 14 years in prison, horrendous sentences that, you know, the most evil criminals don't even get, you know. But of course these people are more of a threat than criminals, because, you know, your ordinary criminal isn't a threat to the status quo. They don't really affect people that are wealthy and rich and big business. But whereas people taking action against animal experimentation and against other forms of animal abuse are actually, you know, hurting big business. And this is why these really big sentences began to be given to people. And so that's another reason. And I think there's been a change in society. I think people became less willing to be active for whatever reason. And so all these things together meant that the ALF went into decline, and meant now there are very few ALF actions, certainly in this country. I think in some other countries it's more active, but certainly in this country, the ALF, there are very few ALF actions. But I don't despair about that. Although the ALF achieved so much and saved so many animals, spared so many animals, and I'm very proud that I was a part of that. don't despair that that no longer happens to any great degree. Because you see, I think there's an even better way of sparing animals from slaughter and suffering. I think there's an even better way of doing that. However great the ALF was, there's an even better way. Now, the reason is that because the ALF was a direct action organisation, it's still a direct action organisation. What you had was a conflict, really, between the activists and the animal abusers. You had that direct conflict, the direct attack on the animal abuse industries by activists. But ordinary people weren't in that equation. Ordinary people were totally on the sidelines of that. There was no attempt to educate ordinary people to change in any way. It was just this direct war. And really, to be honest, that had limitations, and that type of activity does have its limitations. And the reason for that is because if we want to achieve animal liberation, we have to educate a very large number of people to actually be in favour of it. Otherwise it's not going to happen, right? And I'm talking about animal liberation, and if you're talking about animal liberation, like, first of all, we need to know what that means. And it means a situation where animals are no longer persecuted, no longer slaughtered, no longer oppressed, no longer tyrannised by human beings. That's the situation we want. That's animal liberation. And then we need to look at the ways in which that happens. And of course, the largest way, the biggest way in which that happens is the food industry. We have a situation worldwide where 50,000 animals are slaughtered every second for the food industry. 50,000 animals every second. It's all imaginable. There are more animals killed every 2 minutes than all the people that were killed in the 10 years of the Nazi Holocaust. Every 2 minutes, you get 6 million animals killed. Quite unnecessarily for food, quite unnecessary, because as you all know, we can all be vegan. And in this country, it's well, certainly according to Viva, it's 8 billion animals a year slaughtered to feed the UK population, which amounts to over 100 animals every year for every person that consumes animal products. So this is a horrifically huge figure. And then there's the other forms of animal oppression. Now if I ask people, what other forms of animal oppression are there? People say, well, obviously it's animal experimentation, 4 million animals a year in this country. There's a fur trade, zoos and circuses, and hunting, and all those things. But I think, sadly, many vegans miss out the second worst form of animal oppression. They miss out the second worst form of animal oppression that exists. The second thing that kills the most animals. And what that is environmental destruction. It's the impact of human beings on the environment. And, I think so many vegans forget about that. And kind of, it seems to me that kind of in a way what's happened, and a lot of that's caused, is because of consumer society. The more consumption is, the more production, the more use of natural resources, the more impact on wildlife habitat, for instance. And yet sometimes it seems to me that what the vegan movement wants to do is just to be a mirror image of consumer society, so that we become consumers of vegan products instead of consumers of all the other products that people consume. And we need to really address that and do something about that, because even if we had an entirely plant-based human society throughout the world, if we don't reduce consumption, if we don't reduce things like industrialisation, if we don't reduce human population, then, okay, animals are going to be better off, but we're not going to have animal liberation because we're still going to have so much slaughter caused to animals. And another thing that we've got to get rid of capitalism, because capitalism drives greed. Because, you know, that it's based on greed, it's based on selfishness, based on consumption, and it's not compatible with animal liberation. The political systems are compatible with animal liberation. We need eco-socialism or green anarchism. They're both the same, really. It's just the end's the same. It's just the means by which they're achieved are different. That's the political system we need. That's what we need to work towards to get that. And you know, one other fact, or a couple of other facts. In the last 40 years, 50% of the wildlife in the world has been destroyed as a result of human activity. And the other fact, of all the mammals in the world, only 4% are wild animals. Only 4% are wild animals, 36% are humans, 60% are animals reared and kept by humans for food. So that's what we've done to wildlife. Only 4% of mammals in the world are wild animals, and that is absolutely appalling. And we have to do something. We have to do something about that. But also, you know. So basically, going back to this cause of the oppression of animals. Now, the fundamental cause of the oppression of animals is speciesism. It's human supremacism. It's this idea that quite illogically, quite irrationally, quite selfishly, humans think that they are more important than other animals. And that's just a nonsense. We are an animal, the same as them, living on a planet. They have equal rights to live here, to enjoy the earth, and to be part of this world. And yet, humans think that they can use animals, oppress them, do what they want to them. And that idea has to be changed. That's speciesism. And we challenge that, I think, most fundamentally by educating people to be vegan. Because the most speciesist thing that anyone does in their everyday life is to consume animal products. Most people don't go out hunting, or most people don't wear fur coats or are involved in animal experiments or anything like that. Those are like really small minorities of people that do that. But almost everyone consumes animal products. And we really have to get active against that, and we have to remember that we're actually not winning. It's great when you hear figures like, well, there's 4.5 million vegans in the country now that compare the market research that was done recently. That 7% of people are vegans, and it's an amazing figure. But what we've got to remember that if present trends continue despite that, if present trends continue in food consumption throughout the world, in 45 years, the amount of animal products consumed will have doubled. And we need to address that, and we need to address that by getting active. All of us need to get active as much as possible out in the real world. Now, social media is great, and you know, I do lots of social media, and I'm sure, you know, a lot of vegans do, but it's not enough. We also have to get out there, have to get out on the street, with street stores, with leafleting, things like Earthlings Experience, Cube of Truth, all these things. All these things that educate ordinary people to go vegan. We have to be where ordinary people are and educate them. That is vitally important. And we all have to up our game on that. Everyone can do it. We don't all have the same amount of time. You know, there's other things going on in our life. People have jobs, people have family, etc., etc. But we can all find some time. All of us, all vegans, can find some time to be active and to spread the vegan message at every opportunity. And one really important way you can do that is through local vegan groups. And what makes me sad is that so many vegan groups are just all about social stuff, aren't they? It's all about, oh, let's go for a meal, and here's a picture on Facebook of the latest kind of vegan junk food product that I found in Morrison's. It's all that, isn't it? And like, there's all like loads of people comment, and when you put something on about activism, it's like, you know, it's like deadly quiet, and you can hear the tumbleweed blowing because no one seems to be interested. Now that has to change. And I think that all vegan groups should have an active component. They shouldn't just be social. It's got to be active. So if you're in a local vegan group, get them to be active. If they refuse to be, then start another one that does include activism in what it does. Or if there isn't one in your area, start one. Because people can do things as individuals. Of course you can. You can leave leaflets on public transport, put them through letterboxes, hand them out, for instance. But as a group you can do so much more. You can do so much more. Now, so please do that, and everyone get active and get active with others so that we can really turn things around. Now, I noticed that a chap has just come here that I want to invite up onto the stage. Because this is very important. I'm going to end with this, and I'll be given, I'm looking at my time running out here. I hope I'll be given time just to do this, because this is really important. Because you see, one of the problems we've got, I think, is with the definition of veganism. And if I read to you the Vegan Society's definition of veganism, there we are, going if I get this phone to work. All right, the Vegan Society's definition of veganism. Veganism is a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. Right, that might sound okay, but I think there's two things wrong with that. First of all, where's the mention of the environment? Where's the mention of the second most worst cause? There's no mention of environment protection in that, right? And the other thing, it's all about what you don't do, isn't it? It's like you don't consume animal products, you don't involve yourself in animal exploitation. But like there's no mention of activism. There's no mention of spreading the vegan message as being an integral part of veganism. And I think that that's really important. Because what we have to remember, we're members of a species. We're members of a species that's horrendously abused other animals for thousands of years. Like a Nazis of Earth, you know, that's put its jackboot across all the other creatures. And once we are aware of that, once we realise that, it really is our duty to do as much as we can to stop it, to do as much as we can to actually prevent that. And that needs to be spelled out, and I think it needs to be spelled out in the vegan definition. I'd like to, if I can welcome onto the stage Mr. Tony Harris. Tony's a long-term, very active vegan campaigner. And because of this concern about the definition of veganism, the existing definition, and how it's lacking, Tony actually came up with some help from myself, came up with a really much better definition of veganism, which I'd like him to read out.
Okay, folks, this definition has been recently adopted by the Vegan Flag organisation, and it's important that it should include a dynamic element, a sense of duty to educate others, and so forth. So, this is it. Veganism is a way of living that seeks to exclude all forms of exploitation to non-human animals, which extends beyond dietary considerations to the avoidance of all forms of animal abuse, including harm to their natural habitats. It includes a moral duty to actively oppose all forms of animal exploitation and to encourage and educate others to become vegan, with the core aim being the eradication of speciesism. We want to encourage as many organisations. I didn't think the vegan flag would take it, but they did, straight away actually. I'd like to think the vegan society would consider it, maybe with everybody's support. The time has come. You see, the thing is, we are losing the battle. Everyone is going around saying everything's just happening, nothing just happens. 74 years of hard work is what's got us to this situation. And during the last 60 years, the amount of animals used has trebled, and during the next roughly 34 years, they're going to double again on today's figures. So, this is mainly due to increase in GDP per capita, followed secondly by population growth. So if we're going to stand a chance, 34 years is not much time. I mean, this is an absolute catastrophe that's happening right now. It's getting worse and worse and worse. But the good news is, look at Britain. We've got what? Some people say 3 million, 3.5 million even, vegans. Or we've got the numbers. They've got Facebook, we've got technology, but we've got the numbers. We're against a mammoth opposition. They will fight back. The animal abuse industries will fight back, and it's going to take every ounce of effort from everyone to combat it. All you need is your faith, your self-belief. Every vegan needs to get active. It's not good if I was a racist just to say, okay, I'm not going to be a racist. This guy can be a racist. This guy can be a sexist. It doesn't bother me because I'm not a racist. If we consider that the core aim is to combat animal abuse, then we have a moral duty to change the person to our left and the person to the right. Just have belief. Get out there. Get active. We can do it. And we need to show that Britain, this world needs one country to show the way. Yeah? Let's make Britain, this country, let's veganise Great Britain. It can act as an example to the rest of the world. Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
in a very active local vegan group, White Forest Vegans, which operates in a little bit south of Birmingham, in the Kidderminster area and the towns around there. We have just adopted that definition of vegan, the vegan flag definition, which Tony's just read out and he was part of creating. We've just adopted that as our official definition of veganism. And what I would like is for all vegan groups to adopt it as theirs. So we've actually got the philosophical basis for increased activism. We've got the philosophical basis for protecting the environment as part of veganism, as well as protecting animals in other ways. So please do it. Please get active. Do what you can, do as much as you can. If all vegans do it, if all vegans become active, we can do it. We can achieve animal liberation.
Yeah, that was Ronnie Lee.
Yeah, ladies and gents, if you're a student of Bournemouth University, you've lost something, check your wallet. Likewise, if you travel with anyone as a student at Bournemouth University, check your wallet, come and see me, we've got something that belongs to you. Thanks.
Bye guys. Go vegan if you aren't already, and if you're vegan, get active. Bye.